facilities, the next standard, and that's basically if new manure storage structures are built on one of these farms, then they need to be constructed according to certain engineering design standards. Again, we referenced the Natural Resources Conservation Standards, which most land conservation offices and farmers in the state are pretty familiar with. If a farm has existing manure storage, someone has to go out there, an engineer in particular, and certify that those storage structures either are safe and working properly, and if they're not, they have to come up with a plan to either abandon that manure storage or a plan to fix the manure storage and bring it into compliance with the rule. Next slide. Runoff management it pretty well mimics what the other state ag performance standards are, so keeping cattle out of the stream, controlling runoff from animal lots and cows out in the pasture, those kinds of issues. What's new with the livestock siting rule is that certain farms may need to have leachate storage control, so any runoff from feed storage would need to be dealt with collected land enterprise properly. Next standard. Okay, remember when I was talking about animal units? Well, the siting rule kicks in at 500 animal units. That's when locally these permits can be issued. Now, some of you are probably familiar with the CAFO permits, which DNR does, meaning the concentrated animal feeding operation permits, so the biggest farms. Those are at 1,000 animal units. And that permit would be required in addition to the local permit. And there is a provision in the rule that if the Department of Natural Resources has issued the Wisconsin Pollution Discharge Elimination permit for a CAFO, that approval can be substituted for some of the local, or some of the worksheets that will be turned in for siting approval. So mainly the runoff, nutrient management, and the waste storage facilities. The reason being, DNR requires pretty much the same requirements, and they're actually more restrictive on those things. So again, the siting rule applies to farms that are not CAFOs, that are smaller. Next slide. So as of the beginning of February, there have been 55 permits that were issued under the livestock siting rule. About half of them are for farms that are under 1,000 animal units. The smallest one is a farm in Jefferson County, which I think was 315 animal units. And these red dots up here just reflect where those farms are and who's been issuing the permits. So about half of the local governments that have adopted this ordinance, that's all they've done. They haven't had to look at an application and determine if somebody applying, if they meet the standards or not. So 11 farms are regulated by town ordinance. The remainder are permitted through the counties. Okay, the Livestock Facility Siting Review Board was established by the Siting Law, Chapter 90 through 90. And this board is basically an appellate body that's available to farmers and neighbors within 2 miles of these permitted farms. And so once the local government decides to either approve or deny a permit for an application for a permit, then if someone doesn't like that decision, they can appeal to this body. Of course, they can still take their appeals to the local court or different remedy, but if they want to appeal it to the state body, this board is available, and they're going to look at the record that was developed locally, determine if the farm meets the standards in the rule, and if the decision was made correctly on the local level. So far, there's been 6 appeals of the 55 permits that have been issued. However, that's only for 4 different farms. A few of them have been appealed multiple times. So 3 of the local decisions to approve these expansions, they came to this board, the board looked at the evidence and the record, the decision was right, they should expand. 1 local approval for a farm to expand was reversed. The farmer didn't comply with the rule, and the county should not have issued that permit. And then 2 appeals did come into the board, which they were outside the scope of their jurisdiction, so they couldn't look at it. And one of the appeals has been appealed again to the State Court of Appeals. That was heard last week in Madison. We'll see what the verdict from that one is. We'll just have to wait. Next slide. All right, so that kind of concludes my presentation. Again, I just want to remind you we're here to focus on the livestock sighting rule itself, the standards I talked about, and the process involved in issuing permits or evaluating them, what goes along with it. If you want to speak, again, you have to fill out a comment card, provide it to one of us. We'll put you in order and come up to the podium and talk. As Richard mentioned, I'll be taking written comments until March 10th. Some of the handouts in the back have our address, both mailing and email address. We can provide comments, or you can fill out a form, turn it in tonight. So with that, I'll entertain a few questions if people have any.